All right, good morning. It's time for us to start. We still got folks milling about, but I think people are making their way to the classrooms. So we're going to continue with our series of lessons on the influence of a woman. So we're quite a ways into this. We have about a month left of different women. There's a lot of women we could have talked about. There's a lot of choices, seeing how their influence was used both for good and for bad. But this morning, we're going to look at why Delilah was put into the Influential Women Hall of Fame. She's going to have some strong influence here. And we noticed last week that Samson, because we're still talking about Samson, we talked about him last week, his mother seemed to have some limited influence, or she was limited in the amount of influence she had on Samson. And a beautiful woman was quite influential last week in Samson's life. And so we're going to see again this week how he seems to make poor choices with the women that he associates with. So we're in Judges chapter 16 this week. Hopefully everyone got one of the worksheets with the table for us to fill out. We'll do what we've been doing, and that is go through the story and just hit the highlights, hit the facts before we start answering these questions. The story starts, or continues actually, in Judges 16, verse 4, when it says there, after this, it came about that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. So right off the bat, he loves a woman. So what was the relationship between the two, even before we get into the table? What do we know from the story about this relationship? Are they married? How do we know? It doesn't say. Were they just living together? Was she a prostitute? Some believe so. There's not a whole lot here about her other than where she was from or where she lived, and she was a Philistine. So, does it even say that? Well, we know that previously he had an eye for beauty, and that seemed to be his number one qualification. But we don't get a whole lot of information about her other than her actions. But there's a lot of people who believe that she was his concubine or a prostitute, but there's really not, it's hard to say. So, okay, but he loved, according to verse 4, he loved her. So far, he had killed thousands of Philistines. You know, he had this ongoing feud with them. And last week, we looked at his fiancée, who he didn't marry, and how the Philistines that she knew threatened her if she didn't help them find out the riddle. She's given to eventually another man to marry, and he takes revenge on them, burning their crops, and they respond by the Philistines by killing this woman and her father. So, and this is really some ugly stuff going on here. He gets more revenge over that, and then the Philistines this is just building this feud between Samson and the Philistines. So they have not given up when we come to this instance with getting him. They want him dead. Continuing with some of the facts from the story, the Philistines come to Delilah and they offer her some money if she will find out where his strength lies. How much money are we talking about? 1,100 pieces of silver total. Well, that was. It says that the Lord of the Philistines came to her and offered her that much each. So we don't know how many lords there were. There was plural. So is 1,100 pieces of silver sound like a lot? It would have been. This is life-altering money. This is incredible amount of wealth. And if there were just two of them, that would have been a lot of wealth for her. So that's potentially a lot of motivation to assist them in their quest. Something else about this, the fact that they want to know where his strength lies. What does that tell us about Samson? Anything? Glenn?
We think of what we brought up last time was traditionally we think of him as kind of an Arnold Schwarzenegger type.
Right.
It doesn't appear that they're looking for how is this guy so strong?
Right.
It evidently appeared that way.
Yeah, so what Glenn is saying, in case you didn't hear that on those on stream, it must have been that it wasn't in his physique that made him that strong, because they would have seen that, but they're trying to find out what the secret of his strength is. It may have been that he didn't have much of a physique, and the strength was just a mystery to everybody. How is he able to do these feats? Nikki? Yeah. Yeah, the strength displayed was extraordinary. It was miraculous, and I don't think anything he had done could have been attributed even to Arnold Schwarzenegger type stuff. The stuff he's doing is incredible, killing thousands of men at a time, knocking down the city gates. So he's clearly got something behind him that's beyond just regular physical strength. And so they want her to find that out. So what's her method of getting this secret information? What does she try? Okay, she takes the direct route, doesn't she? She just asks him, please tell me the secret of your strength so we can subdue you, we can afflict you. That's what she's asking him directly. Okay, which is, it's pretty direct. It's surprising that, and I'll remind you, these are real people and real stories, and this is one of the stories that sometimes we kind of make it into almost a fairy tale because it's just so incredible. But this is actually something that played out, and she's being just that direct. So what is his response to her direct questions about the secret of his strength? Yeah, so he lies to her 3 times about the secret of his strength. Are these even believable stories he's telling her? It must be, because she goes along and she tries to, these new ropes that have never been used, or these green vines, and weaving his hair into the loom, these silly things, and she tries them all. And when she does this, she calls the Philistines in, and they're hiding, in my version says, in an inner room. So the first time this happens, the Philistines are hidden in the inner room, and she ties him up, and she wakes him, says the Philistines are upon you, and he breaks them off. He's not at all slowed down. What happens to the Philistines in the inner room? Well, if they were smart, right? Again, we don't know. There's parts of these stories that just make us wonder. So you've got this situation where how many were in there? Well, we don't know. But I'm guessing to subdue them, they would have had at least 4 guys. So you got these 4 guys, or this number of Philistine men, warriors, hiding in the house, and it didn't work. He's not even, affected in any way by what she's tried. And so you got this awkward situation later on where, they're trying to sneak out, or he's getting something out of the closet, and there's 4 guys in there. I mean, we don't know what happens, but it's just another weird thing in the story that we wonder, how did they get out? Did they have to wait a day? I don't know. It's just interesting, because it keeps happening, and she is trying these different techniques that he's coming up with, and they're just not working. And so she is getting more and more desperate to find out what that secret is. Okay, so she doesn't stop after the 3 times he lies to her. Verses 15 and 16. Let's see. Now let's go back. Verse 13. Then Delilah said to Samson, "Up to now you have deceived me and told me lies. Tell me how you may be bound." And he said to her, "If you will weave the 7 locks." No, that's one of the ones we've already covered. I was correct, I think. Okay, verse 15. That's what I said initially. Verse 15. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have deceived me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." And it came about, when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him, that his soul was annoyed to death. So he told her all that was in his heart and said to her, "A razor has never come on my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." Verse 18. When Delilah saw that he had told her all that was in his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all that is in his heart." Okay. So that's her technique to finally get his secret out. In these other 3 attempts after that, it's clear that he can trust her, and he's comfortable now sharing the secret. Is that how she got to him? She's demonstrated through these other attempts that she's trustworthy. She made him miserable, right? He stayed with her, and he gave her what she wanted. At this point, is this story even believable? I mean, she's not been trustworthy. She's obviously trying to undermine him. She's a threat. Every time he tells her what the secret is, how he could be bound, she tries it. How is this believable that he would eventually give in this circumstance? Glenn says she was really good looking.
That seems to be his situation.
Love is blind. Is that the reason? Okay. Morally, he didn't have strength. Okay. And we see God using all types of people to accomplish his will. And this is a case here where Samson had great physical strength. Morally, he didn't have the strength. Julie? Okay. Right. So was it the hair itself that was making him strong? I mean, I mean, Julie's right, but something that we focus on is the hair. And even in the narrative here, it talks about later his hair begins to grow. Does that mean his strength was growing again? Was the strength actually in the hair? What was the strength in? Yeah, because that hair was a kind of a contract with God, and there was a lot to being a Nazarite, and it seems, what we can tell, Samson didn't follow all those things, but the hair was the part of this agreement, this covenant with God that Samson focused on, and apparently God, that was the bond they had, was through this long hair. Does Samson acknowledge God in all these? Is he giving credit to God for the strength through all these different escapades? Nikki says no. He doesn't give God the glory. You're right. In fact, even when he prays to God, he's praying for his own self-interest. But he is praying to God. He's telling people, God is giving me the strength. Here, he acknowledges God, and it's not the way that we would like to see God acknowledged. In the fact that, God, I know you're working through me, and I pray that you give me the strength so your name can be glorified. We never see that. But he does call out to God. He acknowledges God. And he's going to do that again when he's struck blind or he had his eyes gouged out. He does reach out to God and ask to be given strength again. But what I think we focus on naturally is the hair being shaved is a secret to his strength. But that was really a sign of God's covenant with him. And by allowing his hair to be cut, he's making a choice between God and Delilah. And he's gonna go with her. And even though he didn't cut his own hair, the fact that he has made this known to her, he's allowing that relationship to be broken. Carter? That's true. People do have a death wish and sometimes do things that's against their own self-interest. If you had talked to Samson and laid it out for him and explained to him, by sharing this information with her, you realize she's going to give this to the Philistines, and the Philistines are going to kill you. Don't you think he would have not done what he did? But he knows that. He knows that's what she's after, and he still gives it to her. He gives her that information. And that's why I say sometimes it's hard for us to believe this is a real story. And yet it is, and it's a demonstration of how influential a woman can be. He's doing something here against his own self-interest. He's given up everything, and he goes along with it. Raul first, and then Glenn, and then Eric. What's that? Oh, Glenn. Okay, go ahead, Glenn.
Well, in verse 20, I think it kind of gives us a little bit more believability to it. Because Samson, he had given up this information, but he still thinks he's got the strength. So he says, like before, I'm going to break this off and be mine.
Okay.
So I don't think he realized he was really selling himself out as much as he really was.
Okay.
He knew God's using him as a tool against the Philistines. Maybe he'll continue to do so. I don't quite get this thing.
But even by not really thinking it through, he is allowing Delilah's influence to undo everything that he would have wanted done. Okay, then Raul? Right? Right. Yep. Eric?
Yeah, I agree with what Donald said there. We can also look to Jacob and Esau and how apparently so easily Esau sold his birthright that what would be
Right.
likewise, we can look at ourselves and say, well, logically, I know I should not commit this sin, but when we let our emotions come in, we get weak at times. If we could kind of, take a step back and look at what is this sin, what path is that going to lead me to, and if we can see it all the way through the end and see that this could lead to my spiritual death, my sure we would stay away from that, but the reality is, we can do things replacement, and we forget about that, we let lusts and our emotions control us rather than our faith in God.
That's true. And is it part of it? Part of it is living in the moment, perhaps. I mean, we were complacent is a big problem, but also perhaps in the moment, Esau was just that hungry. He was focused on his hunger. Samson here may be focused on how annoying she's been and just wanting her to stop. And so not really stepping back and looking at where we are in our life with God and thinking about the consequences. Jeff, did you have one?
But God wants our heart, and scriptures say that we gave his heart to Delilah.
Uh-huh.
When he gave his heart to Delilah, no longer did he connect with God.
Yeah, I think he really is making a choice here. Even though it may have been a choice in the moment, he was choosing Delilah over God. Rob? Right. Okay. True. Okay. So we're talking about, I think Jeff brought up the fact that Samson, his heart wasn't for God. Something that's interesting here in my verse 18, I'm not sure how, I didn't look at the other versions. Verse 18, when Delilah saw that he had told her all that was in his heart, how did she see? What did she see in Samson that gave her some kind of clue that he was being honest this time? Can you see when someone gives you something from their heart? What did she see in him? And the defeat, maybe, is what she noticed? Okay. Yeah. Okay. In the way he presented the information, it was more of a defeated as possible. We don't know precisely what she saw, but the fact that it makes the comment here in another place, she could see that he had opened his heart. It makes me aware that, women have the ability sometimes to read a man beyond the ability of a man to read a woman. And that's perhaps what makes women influential, is they can sometimes read us men, and she read him in this instance. Whatever he had told her before, however he had presented it before, she could sense this time this was different. And she immediately acted on this information. I don't know if y'all had that same sense or not from your own experiences, but it seems to me that women are better at reading people than perhaps men are. And she used that skill here, and she called for the Philistines immediately, and they came. So the other thing that's interesting, and we're going to run out of time here if I don't keep this moving. When his hair had been cut off, she begins to afflict him. And it doesn't tell us what she was doing to him, but that doesn't sound good. Is that the behavior of a loving person? Okay, so did she love him? No matter what the money offered to her was, I don't think it changed the way she felt about him. It seems to me, based on her behavior here, that she had no love for him. And yet he was convinced otherwise. He thought she could be trusted. He loved her. He seemed to believe she loved him. So that's an important lesson too, I think, is that a man can be convinced that this woman loves him and be completely wrong. Now, not that this is a common occurrence, but it is something that can happen. And I think here, it's one of the lessons we learn, men and women should be aware of, that we can be fooled into thinking someone loves us. And this is certainly what's occurred here, it seems to me. Okay, verse 20, the Lord departs from him. And again, I don't want to get off on the story of Samson here because there's more to the story. But for today's lesson, we're really only going to cover this far. The Lord departs from him, and he doesn't have the strength that he's always had. The Philistines bind him, they gouge out his eyes. And it's kind of ironic that his eyes are gouged out at this conclusion of all these bad choices he's made. Because his eyes are what got him in trouble in the first place, always judging people based on their beauty. His eyes have gotten him in trouble since he was a young man, and finally here, this final mistake, and his eyes are gouged out. It's maybe perhaps ironic, or maybe just better said, it's just fitting. That's how this concludes. Okay. Any other facts we want to add to this before we go through these questions? Did I miss anything of importance? Okay, let's go to the worksheet and go through these and talk about the ones that are most relevant. The relationship with the influenced individual. I put down girlfriend. Prostitute. Shacking up, okay. All appropriate, I think. What is the relationship between the two, long-term or short-term? Short-term. Well, we don't really know precisely how long this occurred, but they seem to be living together. So in some regards, you might consider that long-term, but there's no information given precisely about how long they were together. What was her method of influence? I think she tried multiple methods here. What are some of the methods she tried? What's that, Rolf? Sympathy. She had sympathy for him, or okay, she wanted, okay, yeah, because eventually she plays a guilt trip on him, and you don't really love me, and so she was relying on the sympathy that he would give her the information. Okay. Okay. The nagging, yeah, and that went on for a while. It sounds like for the text. Okay. What else? Yeah, initially she's just asking him for that information, and she kept asking. Okay, so direct. She started with a direct approach. She did some guilt trip. She tried to just wear him out with annoying behavior. What else? Did sex play a part in the influence? It doesn't mention that, but it certainly sounds that way based on the story as a whole, that's what motivated him. Beauty, pleasure. So it's quite possible that was part of her technique. I also put down she pouted. She was pouting part of the time. And Raul kind of referenced that with this sympathy thing. You know, you don't really love me. If you did, you would have shared. So she tried all kinds of different methods. What was the impact of the influence? Samson was captured. Okay. And what eventually happened? Yeah, Samson's going to be killed as a result of all this. What happens to Delilah? What's the end of the story for her? Doesn't say again. We don't know if she lived happily ever after, and she lived in her wealth, or they ended up killing her like they killed the other fiance. We don't know anything about it. She could have been in the building, that temple, when it collapsed. It's possible. We just don't know. Was the influence a result of a conscious effort? Clearly, she started out and she worked through all these different approaches. Was this instance part of a larger pattern of influence? Yeah, but I would consider that all part of the same. I mean, this went on for a while, but I would consider this all part of the same episode. I mean, was she like this with birthday presents? You know, tell me what I'm getting. Tell me what I'm getting. Was she like this when, you know, they're going to pick a vacation spot? You know, we don't have any information. But she seems to be skilled at influencing Samson. And you can imagine this is kind of her personality. But we don't have any information about a larger pattern. Was Samson aware of the effort to influence? Yeah, she was very direct, so he was aware. Would he have been better off or worse off without the influence? Obviously better off. But speculation, what would have been the result without the influence? What would Samson's life had been like had she not convinced him to reveal his secret? Okay, and Tia says he would have lived longer and killed more possibly. Well,
Like it says that his parents didn't know that it was God. And the scriptures in Romans chapter 9 give a pretty good explanation. We do what we want to do. And God is going to use us to accomplish his call. So, I think it's subjective. Because God is going to use us. God used Pharaoh to use Pharaoh to accomplish his call. And God is going to use Samson to do it.
God was certainly going to use Samson, and God had given Samson some special gifts, or a special gift here. Could he have used it better? Certainly. He could have done a lot more for God if he had made that decision to do that. He was given gifts from God, and it's disappointing to see that he had this potential and he never really maximized his potential. How so? That's right. They were having a sacrifice or a festival to their false god. Right. Okay. I think we can assume that. If it hadn't been Delilah, he would have killed more Philistines perhaps, but this is going to be an ongoing issue with Samson. He's allowing his moral weakness to limit him, and if it hadn't been Delilah, it would have been somebody else or some other problem that would have kept him. Glenn?
I think in chapter 13, when the angel of the Lord came to Samson's parents and talked about what his role was going to be, he was going to begin to deliver the Israelites from the Philistines.
Right.
God's purpose was certain. Because in his death, he did more real damage to the Philistines.
He did.
Forget the numbers. Mm-hmm. He destroyed the entire leadership.
Okay. Okay. Now it says that he judged Israel for 20 years. And I don't want to get distracted with Samson, but did he judge in the way that other judges? I mean, is he a typical judge for God's people? No. It's interesting. They think he lived at the same time as Eli. Eli was living at the same period for a lot of these experts, and he was the guy you went to for judgment. He was the wise judge. And Samson did not play that role at all. It seemed like Samson was just about killing Philistines and making an opportunity for the Israelites to be able to start this comeback. He started a deliverance, but he didn't accomplish that. So he did do God's will. He killed a lot of Philistines, including leadership and a false god in their temple. Okay. Takeaways. Anyone want to share if you're teaching a young woman about influence, what are some takeaways you might share from this story?
We all have abilities and talents. We all have things. It's important how you utilize it.
Okay, and so I would think certainly demonstrated here is how powerful a woman's influence can be. Was it used for good or for bad? Here clearly she used it for bad reasons. She was motivated for wealth, and she was quite cruel to Samson. So I think we can point out how strong influence can be, but yet also how it needs to be used carefully. So what else? Anything else? Other takeaways? What about for a young man? What might you try to stress to a young man about this story? Okay. Well, it's true. Eh, Do we need, as young people picking a partner, uh, we need to use caution about that person's character? Yeah, for male or female, that's important. And then also, I think it comes back to uh, you can be used in a relationship. And it seems here she's using Samson for her own benefit. And he was convinced otherwise. He just knew that she was right for him. And he looked past all the obvious warning signs. And his parents had previously warned him about another young woman. He didn't listen. He got burned. Here, he makes a poor decision. All the evidence is that he should not trust her, and he does anyway. Um, I,
It's better to put up also to your parents on these matters and looking at
the life of who? Oh, okay. Okay, other takeaways? Sandy? Does it seem that Samson went to God for these kind of decisions? We see him go later to God when he's blinded and he's asking God for more strength. So he prays to God, but he's not, you look at his prayers, they're very self-centered. Does he ask, when he prays to God for strength to bring down that temple, does he ask, God, please give me strength this one last time so that you could be glorified? He wants revenge for his eyes. Now, God grants that request because God has a reason to use Samson. But it's not to Samson's, it's not a good example of prayer. Earlier, when he's killed the 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, he's killed them. He's exhausted. He's thirsty afterwards. He goes to God in prayer then. And again, it's not a prayer for thank you and for further deliverance. It's, God, you let me kill all these men, but if you don't give me water right now, I'm gonna die of thirst. Give me some water. And so, okay, God takes care of him. So, yeah, Sandy makes a good point. Going to God when we're at a decision point, when we're able to clearly see what the right thing to do is, and not just when we need something. Rob?
Most of the judges have what's called decorated stocks.
Okay. Yep. Samuel? Right. Right. And we talked a little bit about this last week. From what little information we have about Samson's parents was that they were godly and they were trying to do the right thing, and still Samson is what he is. And so parents continue to try to raise their kids in a godly way, and there's no guarantee that the kids are going to make the right choices. So, any other takeaways from today, Clark? Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. True. Okay. So this is, I would say, a cautionary tale for young men. Um, and for women, it potentially a how-to manual on how to influence a man and destroy him. Uh, but a lot of positive to learn for both in this story. Okay, we have about 2 minutes. Let's look at one of these discussion questions. Um, was Delilah influenced by the silver the Philistines offered? Okay, James says yes, and it seems like she acted like she really wanted that money. So I think that's true. The continuation, though, or did she really love him? I mean, was it the case that she loved him and then she allowed the silver to overrule that? We don't know precisely, but based on her actions, I don't think she was tormented with the decision between the silver and Samson, because as soon as the hair is cut, she starts personally to afflict him. If she was torn, I think that she would not have allowed herself to do that. And then lastly, is there any evidence that Samson had a devotion to God?
Just to see like verse 17, verse 16, 31, that you have it just go based on all the point out. So just read verse 17. If there was an acknowledgement, I'm not sure.
A devotion. That's right. Yeah. So in chapter 15, verse 18, there's clearly an acknowledgement and a thankfulness of God for the deliverance He's been given, but it never seems to lead to the devotion that we would expect. The part of
It's like Samson had a selfish appreciation.
yeah, selfish appreciation of God. That's true. And we can be as comfortable in our lives and complacent sometimes. God has given us all a lot of gifts, and in this country especially, a lot of blessings. And we can start to just want to be thankful only as far as God does something for us. Don't be a Delilah. Very good. True. Okay. All right, we're out of time. A better story, more encouraging story next week when we talk about Naomi and Ruth. Okay.